Hello, I'm Pastor Paul. Welcome to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. We're glad you're here. We know that you can't always be in worship with us, so we're glad to provide the sermons from our weekly services. We hope that you will find hope and inspiration as we have in Jesus Christ. And now, here's this week's message. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 13th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me, 'Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem.' Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Jesus is on a mission, and so are we. Jesus is on a mission, and so are we. One of the challenges of our gospel readings each week is the way in which we seem to circumnavigate the story. Have you noticed? We weave in and out of the timeline, moving back and forth across large chunks of the story at a time. Last week we read from the 4th chapter of Luke's Gospel, and we talked about bending our will back toward God's will and away from our own. Do you remember? And today we're thrown into the middle of Luke's journey or travelogue narrative about Jesus into chapter 13. I don't blame you if you get a little bit of Bible whiplash, because we do bounce around pretty quickly, but the dots are connected, and there is a reason why the story is told the way that it is, so we trust that it makes sense. So let's start with some context for today's reading. As I mentioned, we have parachuted into the middle of Luke's travelogue, his story of the journey to Jerusalem. This is the narrative about Jesus' return to Jerusalem, where he knows he will ultimately meet his death. This section begins way back in chapter 9, when it says, "When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent his messengers ahead of him. On their way they entered the village of the Samaritans to make ready for him, but they did not receive him, because his face was set toward Jerusalem." Any doubt where Jesus is going? Okay? In the verses immediately preceding today's reading, Jesus has been on his journey to Jerusalem for a few chapters, stopping along the way to teach and heal. And ultimately, this section of Luke's Gospel will conclude when Jesus enters into Jerusalem and cleanses the temple. You remember the turning over of the tables and driving out of the people. Jesus is on a mission. Jesus is on a mission, and nothing will distract him from that mission. Jesus has set his face toward Jerusalem, and he understands that he only has a limited amount of time left to teach and to heal and lead the people into a new relationship with God. Only Jesus is capable of bearing the sins of the world on the cross. Over the verses leading up to today's reading, Jesus has been questioned repeatedly about what is to come, about who is to be saved, and what does salvation look like. And along the way, he's had multiple opportunities to teach and to heal the sick and lame. You've been around people like this before, right? What do we say about them? They're driven, right? You know people who are driven? Have you seen them? Jesus is driven by his calling to have a maximum impact before reaching Jerusalem. Enter the Pharisees into today's reading. Now, I feel like it's fair to point out that the Pharisees should not all be lumped together. Often we read about the bad things that they do, or about the misunderstanding or plotting with others to make Jesus stumble. It's like us lumping together a group of people because of the actions of a few, or even most, perhaps. And Luke may want us to know that some of the Pharisees may be on Jesus' side. Regardless of whether that is true of these particular Pharisees today, they do not come to Jesus except for to offer a warning about Herod. The Pharisees tell Jesus to get out. Get out. The imperative form of the verb. It means it needs to happen now. Go. But Jesus' response back to them is also in the imperative form of the verb, and he tells them to go. Go and tell Herod, that fox, that Jesus is on a mission and nothing will distract him, not even the threats or invitations of a scoundrel like Herod. I like the affirmation of Jesus' mission throughout this journey to Jerusalem. It's reassuring to me to see Jesus focus on the mission of teaching and healing and inviting folks to follow him. It's easy to get distracted from what that mission is for us. As a congregation, Lord of Life is on a mission. We are on a mission to be the church where we are planted on the corner of Hales Mill and Spring Green, right here in Asbury, Iowa. We say in our new mission statement that we are loved by God and sent to serve. We talk about living into that mission through our three great cares. Do you know what they are? Care in our congregation. Oh, I love you. Care in our and care in our awesome. It's important to keep our mission in front of us all the time so that we don't get distracted, so that we aren't pushed off of our mission to join in with God and what God is already doing where we are. We measure the ways we serve in response to God's love through these three great cares and our mission statement. Well, let's make it personal. What about you? What guides you? What centers you? What helps you to stay focused on being who it is that God has called you to be? How do you live out your life of faith when you walk out of these doors each week and into the rest of your life? Earlier I spoke about Jesus' mission, and I said only Jesus is capable of bearing the sins of the world on the cross. That's important to remember. Because you and I are not ever going to be capable of bearing the sins of the world. That is Jesus' mission. But you and I are capable of doing some of the things that Jesus did. You are capable of compassion and concern and care for others and yourself. You are able to listen to the needs of others and come alongside others in God's love. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And it will not self-destruct. Mission Impossible fans? What about distractions? It's easy to get distracted, isn't it? We lack Jesus' focus and we are easily swayed from our plans when things get difficult or don't go as we hope. People can deter or derail us simply by pushing back against us. Circumstances change and things get delayed. We can get lost in all the little things of life. When loving God and loving our neighbor gets lost in the minutia, remember what Jesus modeled for us. Jesus took time away to pray often. Jesus went to the services of the temple regularly. Jesus broke bread with others consistently and invites us to do the same in remembrance of him. Your faith, your regular practices of the faith, are what help you to stay focused on loving God and loving your neighbor. Worship in this community helps you to stay focused on that mission. You are loved by God, and in response to Jesus' road to Jerusalem and fulfilling of his mission, you are sent to serve. I found this quote this week, and it really stuck with me based on the things that are happening in our world and the news from New Zealand. David Lowe said, "Jesus didn't die accidentally. He died precisely because he gave attention to those the larger world deemed insignificant and proclaimed a God who embraced and loved all, not just a few. Similarly, Jesus' resurrection is a story of the triumph of sacrificial love over death, hate, injustice, bigotry, and all that stands against the will of God to love, bless, and save the whole world. Jesus is on a mission, and so are we. How will we share that love? How will we respond to that call to mission with our very lives? That's the big question. Thanks for listening to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. If you're ever in the Dubuque-land area, please join us for worship. Visit our website at www.lordoflife.online to learn more about service times and about our vision for serving God and our community. God bless you.